Okay. Good yantiv. Good yantiv. Good yantiv. Good yantiv.
Yontif.
Tonight, a voice comes out from heaven and says, "Go eat with joy your bread." Okay. Because Hashem desires your needs. Hashem desires your happiness.
Yontif.
And tonight, a voice comes out from heaven and says, "Go eat with joy your bread." Okay. So this voice that just came out from heaven again is not going to come out again. Voice that echo from the YouTube. Don't worry, we figured it out. All right, let's start. So the voice comes out from heaven. What does it say? It says, "Go eat your bread with joy, because Hashem desired your deeds. Hashem is going to bless you with a sweet year. So eat your bread with joy, drink your wine with happiness. Hashem desires your deeds." That's the voice that comes out from heaven tonight. This is, of course, a response to the service of Hashem of the Jewish people on Yom Kippur. And Hashem responds to us with his voice from heaven and says, "Okay, celebrate. You know that I'm going to give you a good year. Eat and drink." And it's actually says by having a larger meal tonight, it's a blessing to have a large abundance in all physical things tonight. Through the meal tonight, it brings blessing to the entire year. So I'm sure everyone's a little worn out from the whole day of Yom Kippur, but we don't want to miss our Melaveh Malka this week. If we have Melaveh Malka every week in a story, certainly not this week, which is a greater blessing, we don't want to miss out on this greater blessing. So I want to share with you tonight a few stories about the Reb Marash. The anniversary of passing is this coming week. The Reb Marash's anniversary of passing is the 13th of Tishrei, and the Reb Marash is famous for his teaching on the words "L'chatchila riber." Reb Marash said that the world says if you can't go under an obstacle, try to go over the obstacle. But I said to Reb Marash, I say go straight over. It means that a Jew is not supposed to look at an obstacle as being an obstacle, because the Jew is connected to Hashem, and therefore there are no obstacles. Specifically, the Rebbe said that during these 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, it says in the Talmud that there's no time to do any mistakes in this time because everyone's busy building their sukkah, preparing their luv and esrog, so no time for any mistakes. But the Rebbe said we should approach these 4 days with the L'chatchila riber, we're trying to go beyond all limitations, and thinking about, not just thinking, but in doing, to help other Jews have the best yontif possible by helping every Jew have all their needs met, their physical needs for the yontif, that everyone should have a comfortable yontif. Anyone you know who needs to have a lulav, has to have a sukkah, there is a way to approach things and say, this is what I could do, this is what I can't do. But the Rebbe Marash teaches us to go l'chatchila riber, beyond limitations and boundaries, and not to be limited by what we think we could do, what we think we can't do. So this is the call of the hour now, is preparing for Sukkot, to reach out to other people that may not have a sukkah, may not have a luv and esrog, and to be there for them. So the Rebbe Marash in general, on Sukkot specifically, the Rebbe Marash in general served Hashem in a way that was beyond nature. We often refer to miracles by the term Baal Shem Skenyonim, things which are beyond nature. We call them things of the Baal Shem Tov. So Rebbe Marash of all Chabad Rebbes is known for his Baal Shem Skemaisim, for he's known for his miracles which are beyond all limitations. But when he came to the Passover Seder, for example, one of the miracles that was obvious was, that wasn't, you couldn't see what was going on, but he would say sometimes, "Everyone please leave the room." Obviously, he was dealing with greater guests than those who were alive at the time by his Seder table. Sometimes he would leave and go into another room. There's some things going on by the Seder that wasn't according to nature. I wanted to repeat something which I shared this morning about the nature of the day that we're in today, the day of Yom Kippur, and going into the next day. We all wore today a kittel, still wearing mine, and the kittel is white clothing representing an angelic feeling, a feeling of not being divested of all physical interests and divested of all feelings of arrogance or hatred or whatever, only angelic positive feeling. That's what the kittel represents. And the question is, how do we wear a kittel for just one day a year and then return to our regular obnoxious selves, God forbid? What does it mean? So I wanted to share these two stories that Marash, which in both stories you see the idea of exposure in two opposite directions. There was one young man who came to Marash, and he wanted the Marash to approve his request for Kabbalah. Kabbalah is smicha is a term that's used for becoming a rabbi, to being rabbinically ordinated. And the term that's used in Hebrew for a ritual slaughter or a shochet, to become a shochet, is Kabbalah. So he wanted the Rebbe Marash to give him Kabbalah that the Rebbe Marash approves of him as a shochet. So the Rebbe Marash responded, you should go to a certain city, there's a rabbi there, and tell him that the Rebbe Marash has sent you. So this guy goes, ordained, not ordinated, thank you. He goes to this rabbi. This rabbi was an elderly man, very God-fearing, and he was very surprised that this young man had visited him in the message, and he was sent by the Rebbe Marash. He wasn't a chas to the Rebbe Marash, never spoke to the Rebbe Marash, and he's really surprised about it. And he's thinking, if the Rebbe sent him here, there must be some inner reason. And as he's talking to him, it triggered a memory. The memory was that he once hired a wagon driver, and he hired the wagon driver on a condition that the wagon driver would only accept passengers that he would approve of. He paid for the entire wagon, but he didn't really want to have other passengers because he was a Torah scholar and he didn't want to be in the company of people that would compromise the atmosphere. And so he told the wagon driver, I'll pay for the whole thing, but only I don't want anyone joining the ride unless I approve. So the wagon driver agreed, and there was no one else that wanted to join anyways, and then they went on their journey. But on the way, they saw these two people on the side of the road, and they asked the wagon to stop. And this rabbi, the wagon driver says, listen, they want to ride. Do you want them to come on the wagon or not? So the rabbi felt bad for them. They're on the side of the road. But it looked okay. There's two guys who wanted to ride. And they come on the wagon. But as soon as they come in the wagon, one of them takes off his clothing, and it's discovered that the he is actually a she. And these two people, which were looking like they were just two men, weren't two men. They were a boyfriend and girlfriend. And they weren't just any boyfriend and girlfriend, but they were also very, how should we say, very inappropriate to the rabbi. They were insulting him, and they were making fun of him. They were speaking very vile language. And so the rabbi realized that this guy who was now asking to become a shochet, he's the same guy who was on the side of the road that day with that woman. And the same guy who was speaking the vile language and making fun of him and making fun of Judaism. So he told this young man, I now know the answer to the riddle, why the Rebbe sent you here to me. And he gave this young man some guidance in life. And this man was sent on his journey, not for the reason that he thought he had come for, but he now was able to realize where he needed to be. Imagine this guy came to visit this rabbi and the messenger being sent by the Rebbe Marash, and even if he was a charlatan, but this kind of divine inspiration being overtly present in his life, you can imagine the kind of effect this had on him. That was one story of exposure. There's another story of the Rebbe Marash, converse, opposite kind of story, where the Rebbe Marash visited the Rebbe of Belz, the Sar HaShalom, who was at that time was blind. And the Rebbe Marash, there's two versions of the story. One version of the story is that the Rebbe Marash didn't want the Sar HaShalom to know who he was, stood far away from the table. And what happened was that the Sar HaShalom, he would open the door of his room, and he would invite them to sit next to his table. And so the door opens, And instead of him inviting the next person in line to sit on his next to his table, the Sar Hashem leaves the room. And he goes to the other side of the room where the Rebbe Rash was far from the table. And he says to him, and all the Chassidim are saying to him, Rebbe, the table's here. Why are you going over there? You're supposed to invite people to the table. You're supposed to sit down with them. Why are you going over there? And the Rebbe of Belz, the Sar Hashem, stood. He was blind, but he walked straight to where the Rebbe Rash was. And he took him by his hand and he invited him to sit down by the table. And he said, young man, you can't hide from me. And when he came back to Lubavitch, his father, Tzemach Tzedek, said to him, you want to hide from someone with divine inspiration? Like, what are you thinking? Another version of the story is that the people would pass by the Sar Shalom, and he would have this handkerchief on his hand, and he would sort of shake everyone's hand through the handkerchief. But when the Rebbe Rash came by, he took off the handkerchief, held onto his hand, and said, a varme hand, a warm hand. That's the story of the Rebbe Rash, and exactly the same story happened with our Rebbe. Our Rebbe visited a grandson. Our Rebbe is a great-grandson of the Rebbe Rash, and he visited a grandson of the Sar Shalom of Aaron of Belz, who was a Holocaust survivor. And the Rebbe visited him before the war. And the Aaron of Belz, he held on. Same thing happened. The Rebbe didn't want to say who he was. Aaron Belz held on to the Rebbe's hand. He had a varme hand, a warm hand. So in both stories, we see exposure. But in the first story, this person exposed as being a charlatan. In the second story, the Rebbe Rash, his warm hand is being exposed. His holiness, his righteousness is being exposed. And I think that the day of Yom Kippur is not a day of we're posing as a charlatan. The opposite. On Yom Kippur, there's an exposure of who we really are. And maybe the whole year we're not feeling the same level of sanctity and holiness, but our true reality is Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is meant to imbue the rest of the year with our true identity. On that note, another story of the Rebbe Rash. There was a chas, the Rebbe Rash, who was a businessman, who would always dress in Shabbos clothing when he came to see the Rebbe Rash. He would come to visit Lubavitch. At home, he was a businessman. He didn't dress like a rabbi. He dressed like a regular businessman. But when he came to Lubavitch, the whole time he was in the city of Lubavitch, he would wear his Shabbos clothing. So one day he says to himself, why do I want to fool the Rebbe? Why do I want to fool the Rebbe and pretend that I'm so holy and so lofty and wear my Shabbos clothing when I'm by the Rebbe? I'm going to wear my regular clothing. I don't want to fool the Rebbe to make him think that I'm someone else. So he wore his regular business clothing. And he comes to Rebbe Rash. And Rebbe Rash said to him, what's this? Like, why'd you change your clothing? He told the Rebbe the truth. I didn't want to fool the Rebbe, pretend I'm someone I'm not. So Rebbe Rash responded, till now, it was apparent that your inner self was here in Lubavitch. And what was outside Lubavitch was superficial. But now it seems that your inner, deeper self is outside, in the city you're coming from, in your business. In other words, Rebbe Rash was saying that what he viewed him as being truthful was actually the opposite. Although the whole year he dressed like a businessman, but when did he discover and reveal who he was? When he visited Rebbe Rash and wore his Shabbos clothing in the Lubavitch, that's where he came home to be himself. But when he was at home wearing his regular business clothing, that was covering his true identity. That's what the things were until he made this change where it seemed like a realization of being honest, not being hypocritical, but it was actually the opposite. It wasn't the voice of the neshama talking. It was the voice of his animal soul. His animal soul was saying, don't pretend to be something you're not. But the godly soul, his true identity, actually was saying the opposite. This is a holy place. This is where you're meant to dress like you are at home, because this is who you really are. You have to be wary of these two voices, be cautious of these two voices, and to know who we really are, and not to get caught by the animal soul saying to us that our identity is our toxicity, our identity is our jealousness, our identity is our... And I think the way to discover the warm hand that we have inside of ourselves is by extending that hand to help another person, like in this context that we're discussing tonight, help another person with a lulav, with an esrog, the place to stay for yontif. That's how you discover your inner warmer hand. That's your true, real identity. The Rebbe Rashab had to present himself before the draft because he came of age to join the Red Army. And actually, I'm not sure it was called the Red Army in those days, the Russian Army. And at the age of 21, and the young man had to report to the draft. So in those days, the only way you could be exempt from the draft was if you were an only child or if you had severe health issues. And many Jews did cripple themselves, hurt themselves many ways, because they would be far worse off going and being drafted into the Russian army. So the Rashab, the son of the Marash, he was in need of going to this draft, and the problem was he had no issues. That was ironically a problem. He had no issues. What's he going to do? So there was one issue he had. His heart was slightly weak, and the good thing about this issue is that it's a very inner kind of issue. It's a very deep issue. It's a very subtle issue. And so therefore it's more like up to the doctor. The doctor wants to say. So it shouldn't be too difficult to find a doctor who could give a stamp of approval that this young man is not fit for the army without him having to break a leg or anything, God forbid, just because he has this issue with his heart. Although it's not such a terrible issue, but it's an issue, it's a deep issue, and a doctor who is the Rashab was tall, and so it didn't seem like he would be a candidate for an exemption from the army. But this is a subtle issue. Perhaps a doctor could sign off and say he's exempt from the draft. The problem was this: in Lubavitch was in the region of Vitebsk, and in Vitebsk there was a gubernator, there was a mayor who had some issue with Reb Marash, and he wanted that the Reb Rashab, would go to a certain doctor that he would choose, and he would be in charge of the medical commission, deciding if the Rebbe Rashab was fit to serve in the army. And that would be a major issue because he was going to try to play the cards the other way around. And so the Rebbe Rash visited this mayor, and this wicked man spoke very sternly to Rebbe Rash and said to him, I'm going to have your son in the army for his entire life. Because that was the law. The law was if someone tried to escape the draft, then they were sentenced to work in the army the entire life. So this governor, he threatened the Rebbe Marash that his son would have to be in the army his entire life. So the Rebbe Marash responded, he is an eternal soldier of Hashem. He can't be a soldier of the Tsar because he is an eternal soldier of Hashem. This is similar to what we're learning about and what we're experiencing today in Yom Kippur, where Hashem silences the accuser. The word Satan, which is the accusing angel in heaven, is numerically equivalent to 359. Why 359? Ha-Satan. Ha-Satan is 364 because there's one day of the year that the Satan has no power. That's the day of Yom Kippur. So the Rebbe Marash, by saying that his son is a soldier of Hashem, by doing this, he silenced the accuser, because it says in the Talmud, in Pirkei Avos, and Ethics of Our Fathers, anyone who accepts upon himself the yoke of heaven, he is released from the yoke of government. If you accept upon yourself the yoke of Torah, you're released from the yoke of government and the yoke of earning a living. So as the Marash, by saying those words, he removed the accusing angels in heaven that were making this whole problem in the first place. The Rebbe Marash in the end went to Petersburg in Petersburg, there were far more senior doctors, the doctors of the Tsar himself. And he made an effort there, and he got the doctor of the Tsar to give a document that said that there's no way that the Rebbe Rashab can serve in the army because of the issue in his heart. And then when he came back, the governor says, well, can I at least see, I just want to see your son. Rebbe Rashab, I can't bring my son to see you because of the issue with his heart, he can't see you. So we saw this the result of this passage of the Talmud being fulfilled. You accept upon yourself the yoke of Torah. He's a soldier of Hashem. Automatically, the whole issue, there is no accusation in the first place. The governor is not even on the scene. He's not even able to put his eyes on the Rebbe Rashab. There was another time that the government put out this notification that they needed money, and if someone would pay X amount of rubles, they could exempt one person from the army. It wasn't at first. It wasn't so expensive. Then it became a lot more. And the Rebbe Marash didn't want to pay this amount for the Rebbe Rashab because he had a vessel in nature through which he could make this miracle happen. But he had another son, his youngest son, whose name was Rav Nachman Mendel. So he had no issues at all, medical issues. And so when his time came to go in the draft, so then they used this other means of exempting from the draft without any discussion. Just want to say one more story there about the Marash. The Marash, when he passed away, his son, Rebbe Rashab, said about his father that it's clear to him that if they would take his father to a mikvah, he would immerse himself after his passing. It's clear to him that if they would take my father to the mikvah, he would go in the mikvah by himself. And he said the same thing happened about the Mzitcha Magid. But the only reason they didn't do this with the Mzitcha Magid is because of Be'itusa. Rabbi Perlov, who wrote the story, he says, doesn't know what Be'itusa means. Be'itusa could mean that that if he immersed in the mikveh, there'd be some issue with the water, or there'd be some issue at the moment. I guess it would frighten people, I'm not sure. But there would be some issue with the Mzitcha Magid, the Rebbe Marash going in the mikveh themselves after their passing. It wouldn't go over so well. Same thing happened with Arizal. The Arizal also, his students, when they immersed him in the mikveh, they said, please forgive us, we are doing this for you. We know that they asked the Arizal to immerse his own head in the mikveh. The Rebbe Marash one time was walking with his father, the Rebbe Rashab. They came out of their room, out of the Tzemach Tzedek's room, and they were holding candles. And while they were walking out of the room, it was clear that there was someone with them. There was someone that they were walking with them. But there's no one that could be seen. They're just walking together. And there's someone that's apparently walking with them, but they're not walking, but no one is walking with them. Yeah, obviously something beyond our understanding of this kind of thing. But the Rebbe Marash is walking with his father out of the Rebbe Rashab's room, and they're holding candles. And the Rebbe, they had to walk through the room of Rebbe and Rivka, of the wife of the Rebbe Marash. And the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, asked his son, the Rebbe Marash, is she sleeping? Apparently, whatever was going on had to be a secret. And so he responded to his father, she is sleeping, but apparently she wasn't sleeping. So we know that part of the story. We don't know more of the story. We don't know what was going on, but that just it highlights that the Rebbe Marash had was connected to a higher world than even in this world, and having guests from a higher world together with his father in ways that we don't We don't know. So, okay, one more story, because David Isser likes to give a bonus story. The Marash was one time late at night, and he walked out of his room, which was next to a synagogue, which was in Melaveh, they called the synagogue the small synagogue. And there was someone who worked in the synagogue, worked in Rebbe Rash's household, called Reb Dov Ber. He was called Bere the Shamash, Bere the attendant. The Rebbe Marash woke him up from his sleep, and the Rebbe, when he saw the Rebbe Marash in the middle of the night, got very scared. And the Rebbe Marash asked him to wash his hands negelvas. So he washed his hands, and the Rebbe Marash said to him, "Don't be afraid, come with me, but don't be afraid." So you can imagine that this guy probably thought he was about to see El Navi or something. They go into the Rebbe Marash's room. The Rebbe Marash takes out a powder, and he gives the powder to this guy. And he said, "I'm going to lie down on the sofa, and you'll take this powder and you'll put it where I ask you to." So the Rebbe Marash lie down on the sofa, and he opened up his garments so that he could see, and he fainted. And he came back to himself again. And the Rebbe Marash said, "I said to you, don't be afraid." What happened was, he could see that the Rebbe Marash had in his body, there was some, between the folds of his stomach, there was some like flesh that was exposed, and the skin was like burnt. And when this chassid saw that, he fainted. But when he came to, the Amarash asked him to put the powder on the various places on his skin or in the flesh to heal his flesh. And the Reb Shmuel Graham Esterman, the Mashpin Lubavitch, who shared the story, he said it was very surprising because the Rebbe Marash always walked around with a smile, always was in a jovial, happy mood, and yet he was in terrible pain, and yet despite his pain, he never wanted anyone else to experience the pain. He always was so positive and so happy despite his pain. Okay, one last story. You know, I don't like giving you guys one last story. So I'll give you one last story. There was a chassid of Rebbe Marash whose name was Rabdon Tamarkin. The Rebbe Marash said to Rabdon Tamarkin, "There's a certain book in Kabbalah that I need, and if you ever discover this book, please bring it to me." So Rabdon, next few days, he sees someone selling books, and he sees this book is being sold. And it was an older book, and he asked the seller, "How much is this book for?" He told him it's 3 ruble. And Rabdon is thinking the guy is giving a high price. This book isn't worth that much, and so he'll wait till the price goes down. So he comes there the next day, and the next day, but then he comes there 3 days later, and that book is gone. He said, "What happened to that book?" He said, "Someone else bought it." Someone else bought it? What do you mean someone else bought it? How much they buy it for? He said 3 ruble. 3 ruble? Somebody 3 ruble for that book? I can't believe it. Who bought it? So he said a water carrier, some water carrier. Okay. He goes and he finds the new owner of this book, and he says to him, "Listen, I need that book." He says, "Why do you need the book?" He says, "Listen, the Rebbe Marash asked me to buy the book. I'll compensate you for 3 rubles, but I need the book." The water carrier is like, "Listen, if you need the book, you should have bought the book first. I bought the book, and I need the book. That's why I bought it. You offered a lot of money. You offered to pay, but the guy would not listen, not budge from for anything. I bought the book. The book is for me." Imagine Rabdan felt terrible. The Rebbe Marash had asked to buy the book, and he could have bought it. He was just, didn't want to. As we just said today in davening, the sin we've done because of being stingy. So he felt terrible, and he came to Marash, told Marash what happened. The Rebbe Marash said, "I already have the book." I don't know the inner workings, inner meanings of the story, but again, we see how the Rebbe Marash, his frequency is the Chatchila River, above nature completely. And that's the frequency we're on now after Yom Kippur. The Chatchila River, beyond limitations and boundaries of our animal soul, we're able to do things in a different way after Yom Kippur. My Elta Zayd about Rama Yar, he loved this period after Yom Kippur. He would bring the entire Sukkot. He said, now the neshama has been cleansed, after Yom Kippur. The neshama is pumping. Neshama is pumping. It's pumping. So therefore, you have to daven better. You have to learn better. There's a new energy Hashem has given us. Main thing is that we should see lechatchila riber, Hashem to take us out of this exile, lechatchila riber beyond any calculations, and should see the freedom of all the hostages and the freedom of Olam Yisrael. And as we pray tonight, Lashana Abba B'Shalayim, next year in Jerusalem, doesn't just mean next year, but this year should be in Jerusalem immediately, and automatically next year will already be in Yerushalayim with Mashiach.